So thank you for coming to the Simon Tech CS Pathways guest speaker series. Thomas Keating is a very awesome first speaker who's brave enough to bear with us as we fight through our tough technical difficulties. He is a recent CS graduate and working currently in the healthcare industry. He's going to share with us his stories, his experiences, and then we'll have some time for a Q&A at the end, if he has time, because I know we lost a lot of time there. So without further ado, Mr. Thomas Keating.
Yes. Hello, everyone. I'm, Thomas Keating. I'm actually, Nikki and Sydney's uncle. I'm 26. I live in DC. I'm a software developer. A little bit of background about me. I graduated in 2016 from Amherst College with a degree in political science, actually, a minor in CS. I just I decided late in the game that I sort of realized I needed to have a job once I graduated, and CS sort of seemed like a good idea. I'd had an internship that summer working in Excel, actually, and I realized how much I hated Excel. Started looking into sort of Python and SQL and just sort of ways to do the job that I currently had better. And then that fall, I started to look into computer science classes. I graduated. I grabbed my first job as a software developer at a company in Arlington, and life has been what it is since then. So outside of work, I play soccer. I do a lot of running. I enjoy trivia, board games, just anything sort of competitive. And I just like just having projects and doing stuff. I just really like completing things. So that sort of brings me to the general structure of this meeting. I had a lot of information. I still do have a lot of information for you guys. I was thinking about doing a sort of long 30-minute block, but I think I'm going to sort of break that up. I'll probably go for about 2 or 3 minutes at a time, stop to see if there's any questions, or, since it's just a few of us, feel free to stop at any point and ask me any sort of question that you can think of, and we can maybe take a sort of deeper dive into that instead of me giving you a breadth of information. If there's anything you find particularly interesting, just stop me and we can look at that. So with that being said, I will, as you see me looking off screen, I've got some information up on a second monitor, so that's what I'm doing. So I'll give like a sort of introduction into sort of the prompt that Sydney gave me. She asked me to talk about my day as a software developer, my day in and day out. I kind of struggled with the question and, wanted to come up with a way to anchor a lot of things I'm going to say. The first idea that I sort of want to talk about in order to talk about what I do in a day-to-day and give context to the meetings that I have with the people, emails I send, and the roles of the different people in my organization. It's sort of hard to talk about this without talking about the software development lifecycle. I would show, a nice graph of the software development lifecycle if I had a little bit more technical capability, if I could figure out how to, display something. But basically, the software development lifecycle is composed of 6 parts. Some of just a little bit of discussion about, the order and of these parts, but more generally, they're thought of as requirement analysis, which is the phase in the lifecycle where you decide what you need your software to do, what you need your software to do, and that can sort of look like what the task actually performs, and then how long you need, how soon you need that piece of software, how much you want it to cost, and just sort of other factors, who needs to use it, how you're going to distribute, all that sort of stuff. But it's generally how does it perform. The second is planning, how you're going to go about producing that software. Third, design, thinking about what platform you're going to put it in, what are certain performance considerations, that are part of this, part of the product you're going to be producing. Then there's, software development, which is the piece I am, most involved in as a software developer right now. As I sort of grow in my career in 10, 15 years, you tend to move towards the beginning of the cycle, doing more design, doing more planning, doing more interfacing with clients to figure out what their requirements are. And after software development, after the process of actually building the software, you do testing for quality assurance. You do end-to-end testing, integration testing. What's the last one? Regression testing. As you add more features, and basically make sure that you're not introducing any new defects. Making sure that you have a piece of software that works continually and is able to be maintained. And then you have deployment, which is putting the software on a specific server, making it so that your clients can access it, basically. So those are the 6 phases. I spend a lot of time in software development and a little bit of testing, and that's what I'll sort of talk about for the most part. But that's a sort of broad overview of what you're responsible for as a software developer. And we'll talk a little bit more about the people that you work with and how they are responsible for other parts of this process as you all work together to create software. So that's like my first sort of piece, an explanation of the software development lifecycle. If there's any questions about that, we can sort of answer those, but I'm going to go and have some more examples of what that looks like on a day-to-day basis later in the talk. So if there's any questions, let me know now.
I don't see any published yet, but if anybody puts any in, I will immediately share them with you.
Oh, right, because they're
it's like moderated.
So. Exactly. Okay, perfect. Then I will go ahead and move on. Stop me if you have any questions. So, why should you listen to anything I have to say? I recently graduated. I have about 3 years of experience. I work for a company called Optum. I work for their consumer data platform, which is, within the Optum Insights division of Optum, which is a division of United Health Group. They're one of the largest insurers in America. They insure like 35% of people in America. It's a gigantic company. And I think that lends a certain sort of experience to a developer, lends itself a certain sort of experience as a developer. But I've also worked at a much smaller company, about 10 to 15 people, a place called Click to Mail. We did a lot of contracting out of the development that we did. We had a small in-house dev team. I was exposed at Click to Mail to a lot more of the sort of planning, requirement analysis, and sort of architectural design portions of the software development lifecycle. So I was talking with the president every day, about what we wanted out of our software, and talking with contractors, and making decisions about when and what features we wanted, when we wanted them by, and party to design, because we had such a small dev team. I was in higher level design conversations that I'm definitely, you don't get a lot of junior devs don't get that opportunity at much larger companies. So I say that to say I have a decent amount of experience at two very different types of companies, and I think I've got a decent amount of insight into those sort of things. So that's why you should, this might be interesting for you guys. So let me sort of scroll down. So I'll talk about Optum and CDP just sort of briefly. I work on the consumer data platform at Optum. Basically, it's a sort of suite of applications that, gosh, I don't want to sound too jargony, but leverages healthcare data for our clients. And our clients are generally health groups, hospitals. Typical sort of client might be, say, like MedStar Health, which is a big sort of conglomerate of hospitals in the DC area. We would help them, set up groups of patients to sort of work with, market to, and we help give them insights into what those group of patients, their needs and preferences, what they are predisposed to with respect to illnesses. So we manage an incredible amount of data. On top of that sits the consumer development platform, and my specific application is called, what's it called? Goodness, I'm blanking now. It's called Cohort Builder. There we go. So that's the application I work on. And there are two other teams that help support the creation of Cohort Builder. I'm on the application team. There's a platform team which pulls out that data from Cohort Data Platform. And then there's a Connect team that helps integrate with some of the other software that these groups use to manage their clients. So things like, if you've heard of Salesforce or something like Marketo, basically these customer record management applications that large companies use to send you emails. Basically, they use this to send you a new coupon, let you know something's on sale, let you know that your package is coming, let you know, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So they build tools to interface with those big platforms that companies have to sort of keep track of their customers. So I promise you now, I'm actually going to talk about what I do in a day after all that all that introduction. So so if anyone has any questions about CDP or how very large companies work with data and organize their software development teams. I mean, there's thousands of developers at UHG. So there's a lot of devs and a lot of organizing of dev teams. So if anyone has any questions about that, just let me know. And I'll move on. So the first sort of like the first thing that I do generally in a day, after getting up and having breakfast and going to my desk, the first meeting I have is called stand up. Some of you have probably heard of this. It's a meeting at the beginning of the day. It's called stand up because you're theoretically supposed to stand during it, and if it goes longer than the period of time someone feels like you just sit down, the meeting has been carried out incorrectly. Basically, they say, it should be very short. You should come in, you should say whether or not you're having a problem and are blocked from doing something, or just shut up. It never works like that. People really relish their opportunity to talk sometimes at stand up. But in reality, people will talk about what they've worked on, what they plan to work on that day. They demo certain features, depending on they demo certain features. They ask questions of other people and sort of make requests. So it's sort of a forum for everyone to get together who's involved in the software development lifecycle, to talk to one another and sort of figure out where the product is at any given point. And that's sort of, I should have said this earlier, but the definition of what I do The simplest definition I can think of is really, I work with a team to produce working software at predictable intervals. And, the stand-up is part of what lets us, release a product at a predictable interval. We check in every day to see, what the state of our project is, sort of instantaneous sort of state of our project. So stand-up is sort of key in letting us release software incrementally, predictably, regularly. So I will sort of talk about some of the other jobs and how they relate to my job. So the first set of jobs in software development, software developers. I'm a junior developer currently at Optum. I was a one grade above at my last company. But junior developers tend to make minor changes. They might, they might create an easier feature in a sort of suite of features. A lot of what I do, sort of easier features. Generally management and it's trying to get you to familiarize you with the code base. Excuse me. And just get you a sort of breadth of experience as opposed to a depth of experience. So there are a couple of junior devs on my team. There are software developers, the mid-level developer, and then senior developers, which is sort of like a higher level developer, sort of 10 years of experience. Software developer probably has, anywhere between 3 and 7, and a junior developer has less than 3. They do the bulk of feature development. They're generally only developing software, not doing any sort of design or planning. They do harder features. They're sort of adept at across the stack generally. Not I shouldn't say that, but they're generally adept at either any sort of back end sort of concerns or front end. So they have some sort of mastery really. They are able to sort of investigate different issues and come to a sort of deep understanding of what's happening on their own. They require sort of minimal guidance, and they generally tend to work on some other set of tools that, maybe geared towards code quality, making setting up a framework for testing your code quality, for setting up a deployment pipeline, setting up looking into AWS and setting up different scripts, just sort of miscellaneous sort of work. So basically these guys can get a lot of software development work done on their own, and they have at least one area of expertise and are just generally sort of comfortable jumping into and fulfilling certain new requirements. And then you have a team lead, who's sort of responsible for the work of every other dev, and organizes those devs, kind of oversees the software development, testing, and deployment phases, really, on a sort of short-term basis, on the basis of sort of execution. He's not necessarily creating these processes, but making sure that they execute on every sort of iteration, right? Every 2 weeks we're supposed to have a deployment. He makes sure that it happens every 2 weeks. He's not necessarily, interested in, the theory behind, should we have them every 10 days or 3 weeks or all that sort of stuff. That's not quite his job. So that's sort of an overview of the developers. I'm a junior developer. I tend to, fix small bugs, to deal with sort of more straightforward features, and familiarize myself with the code base and sort of deepen my understanding of one specific topic, really. So that's sort of what I do day in and day out, and sort of is the bulk of my work. So there's any questions about that, I think that's probably the most like practical and interesting thing I've said so far. Maybe not, but you know, if there's any questions about that, I'm happy to talk about, you know, that portion of my job. The rest
So I've got a few questions. Yeah.
Oh, good. Fantastic. Okay, I was afraid I was losing you guys.
So I'll start with easy technical ones. So what sort of languages do you currently use?
Yeah. What sort of languages do I currently? So I spend a lot of time writing code in JavaScript. I'm working on the front end most of the time right now. I'm working in React. So yeah, I work at a lot of JavaScript. ES6 is a sort of standard now. There's been some changes in JavaScript in the past like 4 or 5 years. And I work within the React framework, and that's very popular. It's a very popular stack right now for sort of more modern companies that don't have like mobile applications. But yeah, and you know, our backend is in Python. I see some of that, and we work within another framework for the backend called Django, which sort of handles a lot of sort of normal create, read, update, delete, you know, information sort of management of, you know, you got a profile, you post stuff, you create different stuff, you delete it, and you want to look at it sometimes. So there's a lot of frameworks around those sort of actions and governing those sort of actions and making them easy to do. So I use a lot of Python, I use a lot of JavaScript, and these are things I think are going to stick around. But you know, there's some other frameworks, you know, namely React and Django, that might not be around forever, but are sort of popular right now. So.
Great, thank you. Had a question from one of the students. I don't know if you can see it in the chat or not. It says, do you have to display very large lists, like 1,000 items or more?
That's a really good question. A couple of times. It happens infrequently. We certainly store very large lists, you know, display them not often. You know, it's sort of, yeah, it's sort of hard to display large lists just from a practical sort of standpoint. No one wants to look through a list of 500 or 600 things, and you know, rely heavily on you know, search features for that, and you know, we never really display more than 7 or 8 options at a time. You know, in the same way that if you were on Instagram and you want to look through your friends, right? You know, it doesn't show you all your friends immediately. It shows you the last 4 you looked at, and once you start typing in, you know, you sort of display, you know, the most popular 2 or 3 that you've been looking at, et cetera, et cetera. But yeah, we don't display a lot of large lists. There's unless it's like, since it's medicine, you know, doctors have 10,000, you know, designations for these diseases, and they're very specific. So there's a couple of those, but most of the time, it's not like that. Yeah. And good thing, I'll stop after this, but you can generally break down a list into different categories. So if you have a list of 1,000, you can say, okay, there's a sub list of 250 here, and then a sub list within that, and you know, it's 125 and 125, and you display it like that. So you break them down into different sections and headers, and eventually you end up with a manageable list. So that's sort of another way we handle that.
Thank you. Knowing who asked that question, he's probably dealing with trying to do that right now and is hoping for technical advice there, but he can look it up. I had a question about the personnel aspect too. Like, how big is your stand-up meeting? How many people are in it? What are the personalities like? Is it like the stereotypical code monkey thing? Or
that's a good question. So at this stand-up, so there's a core of maybe 8 developers. There's 2 people who do quality assurance, So they're heavily involved in, they do the testing part of the software development lifecycle. Let's see. There's a technical manager who's different from the team lead. There's a product manager. There's a scrum manager. There's an architect, a software architect. And oh yeah, there's a UI. Gosh, I can't remember the name. It's like sort of more like graphic designer, UX. I can't quite remember.
Yeah, user experience, UX.
Yeah, but she's not a developer, but she does a lot of mock-ups for what things are going to look like on the front end. And then there, along with the product manager, there is sort of like a junior product person that often tends to end up. Those are 4 roles I could sort of elaborate on, and I don't know which one of those might interest you the most, or I can sort of go on to the sort of gossip of like who's who in the stand-up.
Well, I think it's safe to say none of them are here in this meeting, but I was curious what it's like working with them as people. Like is it pretty welcoming sort of community? Are they eager to help, say, junior developers, or is it more guarded, competitive? What's the atmosphere, the culture like?
Okay, I see what we're saying. No, I think that's actually that's a good question. I think most people on my dev team are pretty good about being available to for questions and working together. I think people are generally friendly. I wouldn't say it's too competitive. I wouldn't say it's competitive. I think that I think my team is they're interested in getting the work that, so we have sprints. This is something I've been sort of beating around the bush and talking about, but every 2 weeks we try to release a suite of features that has been thoroughly tested. It adds something valuable for the customer, and it's sort of generally like a self-contained set of features for right now we're working on the ability to archive cohorts, so sort of like a soft deletion. This is a sort of listing. The list of cohorts gets really long, and we say, okay, we want to give the user the ability to hide some of them. So they've done a pretty good job, and I say management, of focusing people on making sure that these suite of features gets out. And I think people are pretty helpful when they don't really think of things as, it's my sort of responsibility. I think they can start to think more like it's our responsibility to get these set of features out. And I think that's like, it's really hard to wrap your mind around as like a high school student, where all the work that you get, for the most part is you're responsible for, and it's sort of like a sort of reflection on who you are, especially at that age, but yeah, once you sort of break out onto the other side of like the working world, everything is a group project. Everything is a group project, and you've sort of they want to get you to not stop thinking, but sort of change the way that you think about work, and yeah, think of it as a sort of collaborative effort. So I think people are good about that. Other sort of interesting things, like people are interested in their own job. I don't know how to say it. Our UI person is very interested in like making sure the UI is like to a dot, like how she mocked it up, which is of course good, and you want that. But one tension is, your technical manager is really interested in whether something is 85% functional or 90% functional. Not functional. He wants to be 100% functional and 85% ideal. Doesn't really care if something is a little bit like a little bit off in the mock-up, or this thing is a little bit too wide, or I don't know, this thing isn't highlighted at the right time. He's like, okay, does the search functionality work? Is it quick? Will it be out this week? Et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So there's sort of tension about, between management, really, the technical manager, the product manager, and some of the sort of people who do, the work. They're always trying to get us to think about what's essential, and they're not necessarily worried about the details. So I think that's like a lot of the tension. Just like, okay, they have this idea where the application is going to be in Q2, in March, and they're always thinking about that and not necessarily about like what you did today, and the way that you think about it. So they're sort of like focused on the long term in that respect. So that's one tension.
Awesome. Thank you so much for sharing. Just interesting to get a flavor of, sort of the human side of the job too. I know it's pushing 5 o'clock. I might have to disappear for a while to do some stuff with my kids. But I don't know if Semi and Sydney can hang out. I might be able to get back. I can get them in some other activity. Apologize. Was there other stuff you really wanted to share? You really wanted to talk about?
No, I mean, the rest of I was going to talk about a couple more meetings, and I could have gotten into sort of sprints, but I'm happy to answer a question. I mean, that sort of stuff is, I'm happy to answer questions. I've got about 10 more minutes before I have to head out, but I'm absolutely happy to answer questions.
I see there's a new one in the chat. Have you been able to use your political science degree with your current job?
I've been able to use my political science degree. Yeah, I've been able to use my political science degree. No, no, I have not been able to use my political science degree. My political science degree is probably helpful. It's probably helpful in the sort of like, I mean, I have a liberal arts degree too. I went to a liberal arts college, and it's very much sort of like these heady ideas. Why are we doing this? Is this a good idea? Like, is this like sort of moral, or I don't know. Thinking about what the trade-offs are of any sort of action, and less sort of interested in the action itself. I guess it's been good at maybe it's probably helped me with my soft skills. Maybe it's probably helped me with my ability to sort of explain things to people who are non-technical. Yeah, I mean, I think those are really the big things. I think one thing that I do a lot of writing when I do software development. I'm really good about not going straight to the code. It's very tempting to sit down and be like, I'm going to code this right now. So I think my political science degree is like help me say, okay, what am I really trying to do? When I'm building a function, I say, what is going to be the outcome of this? I'll write down the steps. I'll write down a little bit of pseudocode, and then I'll say, okay, now it's sort of time to code. And I think that's a little bit easier, with my training in like writing essays. Sit down, figure out what you're supposed to do, outline, draft, final, and that's how you should code. I believe personally, it makes it a lot easier. I think a lot of people get caught up trying to just like go straight from their head to the editor. So I think that's actually been like the biggest help for me. So I can know. Okay, yeah, there you
can see the chat.
I can't see the chat. I was going to ask you.
Yeah, there is a new question. It says, do you mostly use class components or function components in Reactor JavaScript? If both, what purpose do you use each for?
That's a good question. So I'm still learning React. I have used function components in the past when I definitely should have used class components. I mean, I won't be able to tell you anything React tutorial or like React's sort of official sort of, not errata, but just sort of like group of, I don't know, text they have on their web. Can't tell you, but you know, it really all comes down to state. I think that, yeah, it comes down to state. Are you trying to, what are you trying to track on the web page? And you know, if you even think that you might need to track something on that web page, you should probably use a class component. You know, this is where I have gotten into trouble before. I've said, oh, I'll just do a function component, and I become more interested in, I'll need some sort of state later, and I'm like, okay, now I have to change this back into a class. But yeah, I mean, use a class when you have, when you're trying to, yeah, when you have a component that controls other components, you know, obviously, and when you might want to, yeah, control the state, especially if you're using some other library that you might want to function in a specific or special way. I think that's when I tend to use state. So I'm using some library or something that I've, you know, that's in the code base that isn't what I've written, and I want it to work in a way that it doesn't have necessarily the base functionality for, and I end up having to use state for it. So that's sort of my idea from the trenches. Hopefully that helped you know. But yeah, those are the sort of problems that I generally see at my job, is, you know. So yeah, if you got any follow-up questions, I'm happy to answer those too.
I don't see any follow-up questions right now, but I'll tell you if any come in the chat as we wait. You said you had other topics you'd like to discuss. Would you like to?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I can definitely talk about you know, some of the other people, some of the other jobs that there are that are software adjacent. You know, just to sort of give you an idea, when you end up with internships and sort of in your own job, or if you decide, you know, you don't, not necessarily decide that you don't want to code, but, you know, eventually people stop becoming developer, or they spend less time developing, you know, and they want to move you into some sort of role of management with development, or only management, or, you know, the idea of architecting, and then et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So, you know, it's after you get 10, 15 years of experience, you know, you will probably stop developing 80-90% of your time, and they'll put you in meetings and want you to, you know, make decisions about design, make decisions about, you know, the feasibility of certain projects, and, you know, want you to create frameworks for processes. This is really what it comes down to after you're a software developer, and this is what architects and sort of technical managers are sort of more interested in, is, you know, they want to create a product, but they're also trying to say, what about this process works? How can I replicate it in other teams? And, you know, they're interested in these things at scale, as opposed to on sort of the ground level. So I'll sort of talk about, you know, what the architect on my team does, and sort of technical manager, and then I will have to leave to get a haircut. So I'll go into that. So I'll start with the architect. Like everybody else in the software development world, we're sort of like trying to move onto AWS, or we're sort of switching AWS accounts. So the company that I work for used to be called the Advisory Board. They were acquired by Optum, and you know, they had to switch from the Advisory Board sort of whole ecosystem in AWS to the new Optum ecosystem in AWS, and the architect is sort of spearheading that process. So, he's formerly a coder. He was a CTO at a different company. That company got bought by someone else, and he went to to this architect role. He's more of a system architect. He's trying to figure out what how many servers we need, orchestrating the security aspects of the servers we have, putting together multiple services that are sort of separate, and figuring out how they come together. And I think that's sort of like a hallmark of an architect is they do less coding, but they know how certain systems work on a broader level, what their outputs are, their inputs are, their sort of needs are from a processing standpoint, a time standpoint, and they're able to sort of cobble them all together. So that's a lot of what he does. And so on top of that, right, as he's migrating from the old environment in AWS to the new one, they're asking him to, the higher ups in management are asking him to figure out a way to figure out a script, really, sort of a framework for other departments outside of the consumer data platform and other departments in Optum, so that they can copy what he's doing and sort of broadly apply it. So he's like he's doing a sort of like type of development or creation of procedure that is at an organizational level as opposed to a computer level or a single app level. He's crafting processes for whole software teams and units. So that is sort of what his job becomes. That's what his job is right now. He's formerly a developer, right? Formerly was a CTO of a small startup. But at a big company, he's got his eye. So I'm down here doing my little sort of ant work, on the computer, in CDP apps. There's CDP as a whole, consumer data platform, which he works on, and he's trying to figure out how to create processes in CDP. You can send back up to Optum Insights, and then they can send them over down to some other platform for some other product, and other teams can work off of what he's doing. So he's just like a little bit further up the pyramid, and interested in not code, not teams, but environments. So that's one. That's the architect. And then the technical manager, I'll be brief here and I'll have one more question I need to go. But the technical manager is really sort of making design decisions and planning decisions. He's helping to figure out how much it's going to cost to do things, sort of labor hours, manpower, and money too, and trying to figure out what trade-offs he can make. He wants to, if you present, someone has to present him 3 different options that say, here's the least cost, but we get only 3 features. Here's the medium cost, we get 5 features, and here's the high cost, and we get 9 features, and it looks perfect and everything's great. And he has to say, okay, I'd like 4 features at this cost, and I need to make sure that this other team starts this feature before you all start that feature, so that you aren't blocked when he manages different teams when they do things, making sure that the requirements for them, for those teams, are met, making sure people aren't blocked, and makes trade-offs about the product. And that's a lot of that. That's pretty much what his job is. He's basically the one in Scrum that tells people just like shut up and like tell me what I need to know. Like he's the most like direct person in Scrum. Like he stops tangents. He says, he wants to know the information and go on to the next meeting with the next team, and then go to his boss and tell him, et cetera, et cetera. So he's the least interested in like how your day went at work, but also the most pleasant, sort of contrastingly. But anyways, that's what he does. And I'll take one more question, and then I gotta go.
Well, there are a couple in the chat. So there's a short one. Which VCS do you use? What version control system?
You almost got me. I was like, VS Code? Okay, we use Git. I have never used like Subversion. In fact, that is another version control system. I've only ever used Git. I've never seen any other version control system throughout college at the other place I worked, or
you youngins.
Yeah, right. But yeah, so we use Git. Yeah.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for sharing your time with us and for being so patient with our technical difficulties.
No worries. This was fun.
I hope we can have you back sometime, and it'll be smoother, maybe in person, so you can actually like see the people in your audience and cheering for you and saying thank you for sharing your time. We really appreciate it.
Of course.
Enjoy your haircut.
I will. Yeah. You know, my girlfriend mandates I get them every 2 weeks, so I have to get it out. All right. Thank you, guys. It was a pleasure.
Thank you.
See you soon.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.